Hello there, you're watching the press preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. So it's time to see what's making the headlines with Chief Leader Writer at The Observer, Sonia Sodha, and Chief Executive of ConservativeHome, Mark Wallace. Very good evening to both of you. Very pleased to say that Mark and Sonia will be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's take a look then at what's making the front pages. And Duke pays up at last. The Metro leads with the out-of-court civil settlement in the US between Prince Andrew and his sex abuse accuser, Virginia Giuffre. That also is the top story for The Guardian, as well as The Eye, which says the settlement reached is worth £10 million. The Mail calls it the Duke's final £10 million humiliation. The Daily Telegraph says the settlement is actually £12 million and the Queen is to help pay for it. The Financial Times leads with the Ukraine crisis, with President Putin insisting he's still open to talks, while at the same time not reducing the apparent threat of an invasion of Ukraine. And just a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you can see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. But let's chat through them then with Sonia Sodha and Mark Wallace now. And not all the papers in yet, Sonia, but most of the ones that have come in have put Prince Andrew on their front page with this perhaps surprising settlement, surprising certainly in the timing of it, that he has struck with his accuser, Virginia Giuffre. And you picked up The Guardian to kick us off.
Yes, that's right. So The Guardian, like many papers, is reporting some of the details that are emerging about this settlement that Prince Andrew has reached with his accuser, Virginia Giuffre. The timing might be surprising, but I'm actually perhaps not that surprised to see the Duke reach this, the Prince rather, reach this settlement. We know that he's made some claims about reasons why the allegations that Virginia Giuffre has made against him in terms of the contact that those two have had, the sexual abuse that she alleges. He's claimed, for example, that her account cannot be true because he has an illness that means he cannot sweat. He's claimed that he could not have been with her the day that she alleges that he sexually abused her in London because he was dropping his daughter off to a party in Pizza Express. Now, these are claims that if they were tested in court, he would have to provide some evidence for. His testimony would be raked over, and it would be extremely embarrassing for the royal family. So it's not a great surprise to me that he's chosen to settle, given that that she has made some claims against him, and there is a photograph of the two of them together in London on the day that she alleges that he sexually abused her. So that there is some evidence out there that relates to her allegations. So it's not a huge surprise to me that he's decided to settle.
Well, yes, and Mark, what do you make of this? I mean, Prince Andrew has always strenuously denied the allegations. This settlement doesn't include any admission of guilt by the Prince. He's agreed to make a substantial donation to Virginia Giuffre's charity. He's said he's never intended to malign Miss Giuffre's character. He's demonstrated his regret for his association with Jeffrey Epstein. So where do you think this leaves Prince Andrew?
Well, absolutely out in the cold to start with. But it also, frankly, this is something which I think I'm right in saying that the accuser's lawyers describe this settlement as saying it speaks for itself, and they'll be well aware that simply by referring people back to that, they will be inviting people to ponder what it says about Prince Andrew himself. The fact is that statement, I think it's I'm sure Sonia will have more to say on this in a moment, but that statement to say that he never intended to impugn her character, for example, I think will raise a lot of eyebrows. Frankly, at various times, his lawyers, as I understand it, have certainly seemed like they intended to impugn her character. It's also the case, I would say, the whole handling from the Prince Andrew camp of this whole affair for this whole kind of legal affair and case for years and years has been, frankly, could not have been handled any worse. From choosing to go and meet Jeffrey Epstein after he had been, after the true nature of what kind of monster he was clearly known, and travelling to go and meet him. From that long association, which he now says he regrets, but didn't seem to regret, certainly at that stage, coming out fighting and saying, we're going to fight this all the way, it's completely untrue, it's demonstrably untrue, we're going to fight this at every stage, and then mere weeks later agreeing what's reported to be a multi-million-pound settlement. Frankly, whatever the opposite of having your cake and eating it, this is a double whammy, worst possible way to handle this case, it seems to me. And so he is out in the cold in a public sense and a royal sense. There's a quote in the Telegraph from someone saying that it's been made clear to him the public have had enough from hearing about him. And I think that's to put it mildly.
And obviously the question now, Sonia, is who's going to pay for this, where the money will come from. We don't know the amount. There's the Telegraph's front page suggesting it's 12 million, but there are various figures around, aren't there? I think 10 million, 7 million. We don't know. But people will be asking where that money will come from.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of money, and we know that Prince Andrew doesn't have many assets himself, apart from a mortgaged chalet in Switzerland, which I think he may have got some money from. So it does seem, from reports tonight, that the Queen is going to be helping him out, and that will almost certainly come. I mean, I'm sure it will come from her private funds, but there is this question about what's public and what's private in relation to the royal family. I do want to come back to the point that Mark was making about the way that Andrew's legal case and his lawyers, presumably with his approval, sought to impugn Virginia Giuffre as part of his legal tactics to try and get this case thrown out before he's decided to settle. Virginia Giuffre is a victim of child sexual abuse. She's a victim of sex trafficking. And yet we saw the Prince's lawyers, I think, impugn her character in terms of her motivations for bringing this case. In documents to the court, they described her more as an offender than a victim. And one of Prince Andrew's former spin doctors has been suggesting that the photographic evidence of them together is doctored. So I do think it's really difficult to sort of, I think, understate the seriousness of if the nature within which sort of Prince Andrew has kind of sought to advance this against Virginia Giuffre. So I think she will probably be very relieved with this settlement today as well.
OK, and no doubt the royal family will be generally relieved to feel that there's some kind of line, especially given that it's a jubilee, the Platinum Jubilee being celebrated later this year. We'll return to this story after 11 o'clock, but the other big issue, of course, on the front pages is the ongoing situation in Ukraine. So let's just touch on a couple of the papers' handling of that, shall we, Mark? The Financial Times puts it as their main story. Putin open to talks but prolongs invasion threat against Ukraine. And we saw a news conference earlier with President Putin and the German Chancellor. And there was this suggestion that diplomacy could still be a route through. Do you feel there's a growing sense of optimism that an invasion has been put off?
I don't think there's any grounds for optimism, frankly, on any front of this situation. It's all summed up in that FT headline, Putin open to talks. Of course, Vladimir Putin is open to talks. What he's doing is he's menacing Ukraine. He's menacing the global kind of rules-based order. He's menacing other neighbours and NATO and the Western alliance. And by wielding his armed forces as a violent threat to further invade Ukraine, let's remember he already occupies part of Ukraine, he's hoping that he won't have to invade, that we will roll over and keep on giving him things. The fact is that it troubles me very deeply, actually, when we hear Western leaders, to a certain extent, understandably say their goal is de-escalation. If it becomes the question of de-escalation at any price, then that involves giving Vladimir Putin basically whatever he wants. I cannot see, and I cannot conceive of any form of settlement and agreement that he would accept that wouldn't involve essentially selling Ukraine's sovereignty, territory, democracy, freedom, and dignity, or possibly all of the above. And so, yes, I don't feel optimistic about this at all. This is the product of 14 years of very careful, strategic pressing the West to see how far he can go by pressing us to appease him.
OK, and that story, pretty much second story on a number of the broadsheets, at least, tomorrow morning. We're going to take a break right now. Lots more to talk about very shortly, though, including you don't need us to tell you that money is getting tighter, but we're going to talk more about that after the break. Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. With me tonight is the Chief Leader Writer at The Observer, Sonia Sodha, and Chief Executive of ConservativeHome, Mark Wallace. So welcome back to both of you. We're going to turn to another story in the cost of living crisis theme that we've had rolling out across the last few months. This is featuring, it's in the bottom right-hand corner of the Daily Telegraph's front page, Mark, isn't it? But actually there's a big story on the front of their business section, which you were pointing out. We'll try and get that on screen in a moment. But this is about wages going up, but being outpaced by inflation. So actually, we're all going to feel the squeeze.
Yes, the disclaimer on this is the story's bylined by my brother. So all conspiracy theories about everyone in the media knowing each other, thereby proven. Yes, it's interesting. Obviously, we can all feel this cost of living squeeze, but this is picking out the fact that it intensifies the pressure on the Chancellor further over this national insurance rise, this increase in taxes on working people and disproportionately younger working people. A lot of Tories already unhappy about this, and the cost of living and the wage squeeze is going to make that pressure worse.
Well, so what do you think should happen? Do you think he should drop it?
Yes, bluntly. I think, frankly, if you're talking about the kind of principles that the government's meant to espouse, helping working people, making work pay, helping to encourage people to be able to put aside savings, save for the future, and prosper for themselves and their families, then it seems to me to run counter to all of those principles. And
there is that business section front page there with your brother's article on the front of it. Sonia, what do you think about this national insurance rise? Do you think that it should go ahead? I mean, because it's being earmarked, the money's being earmarked for the NHS and social care, isn't it?
Well, I think the money has to be found for the NHS and social care, but I'm not sure that it should come through a tax rise. So I agree with Mark that at a time, I mean, a 1.2% drop in real wages in just 3 months, that's a huge amount that people will be really feeling as prices go up. Their wages aren't going to stretch as far. And I don't think it's the right time to bring in a tax rise that heaps extra pressure on people. But at the same time, the government is able to borrow, and the NHS is incredibly stretched. There's a reason why we've got very long waiting lists. We have very long waiting lists that were growing even as we went into this pandemic. The NHS has been under-resourced for a decade, so it absolutely needs these extra funds. So I don't think it's a choice between taxes or money for the NHS. I think it's a choice between taxes and a bit of further borrowing at the moment while the economy is in such a deep crunch.